Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, thank you for coming. I'm here to moderate a panel on how AI is changing the face of privacy. And to do that, I have a couple of prominent voices in the industry who are going to join me. I'm introducing Mr. Sounil, who's the Chief AI and Safety Officer for Gnostic, and Mrs. Jameeka, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at Headspace. Thank you for joining us, and welcome.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, so before we get started, I would just want to set the conversation for a second. Obviously, a lot of us have been in the industry for a while, and we tend to think about systems and machines and servers and so on as these entities that follow very clear rules. A lot of those things have changed with AI, and that's what we're going to try to explore today. These new AI systems are able to infer, they're able to make decisions, they're definitely able to remember conversations that they have with each one of us. And so a lot of that is a little bit of a black hole. We don't know what's happening behind the curtains, behind the scenes. So for that, there's a number of new risks, expectations that we should have from our vendors. And essentially, my prominent panelists are going to be helping me explore these topics. So I'm going to start with you, Sounil. The first question is, what assumptions have we been making about how machines process data that are no longer valid as we submerge ourselves in this world of AI?
Sure. Well, I think you hit upon a couple of the underlying assumptions we make about the ability for these machines to process information around, for example, DLP. Okay? If you think about what DLP does, it touches some of our most sensitive data in our enterprise. And yet we're OK with that because we assume that these machines aren't going to do something malicious with them. They're not going to pass judgment. They're not going to remember, to your point earlier, what it sees and take advantage of it. However, we now are changing. We need to reevaluate those assumptions. Because the reason why we are OK with machines essentially invading our privacy is because we don't think that machines have any concept of shame, doesn't have any concept of bias or judgment. And yet now we do have these systems that exhibit or seem to exhibit some of these qualities. So we have to really rethink our machines, the machines that we are now turning to essentially invade our privacy today on behalf of humans, okay? Because we don't want humans to do that, or we let machines do it. But once we let machines do it, are we now, with these AI systems, are we, what sort of underlying assumptions do we need to re-examine and reevaluate to say, what are we going to allow these machines to do, given that they can now invade our privacy and pass judgment and have bias and have all these things that we don't want humans to have to do on our data?
Love it. Jameeka, please feel free to weigh in. Obviously, with your role at Headspace, you deal with highly sensitive data.
Mindfulness, meditation, and mental health, right? So introduce AI and introduce the concept of AI into that space. And I think it's a very different situation of what people expect from privacy. Because when you're talking to your therapist, you expect that that information is not going to be shared. But when you're talking to your AI chatbot that's not a therapist in a similar manner that you would talk to your therapist, well, what are the assumptions that you're making? Because we can see your information. We can see your conversation, and how we store that data and how we protect that data, it's the same, right? We are a anonymization, de-identification company. So we're going to store those conversations and protect those conversations. The difference is, in one case, there's a human that has a stream of conscious, and in the other case, there's a machine that also has a stream of conscious. And I think the other thing about AI that people really love about it is that it's empathetic, it doesn't judge you, and it mostly goes along with what you tell it. That's what we're seeing in the behavior of AI. It is agreeable. Your therapist might not be so agreeable with you. They might push you to do certain things, but AI is largely agreeable to the point of being detrimental. And so I think when we think about the expectation of privacy in that space, we have to ask ourselves, if I shared information that was detrimental to me with a therapist, they might call the suicide hotline. if you share that information with AI, it may not do that. But both of those things are essentially there to protect your privacy. So what is your expectation of privacy going to be like now?
Yeah, and sorry, clarify one thing for us. What does Headspace do? Because you talked about chatbots. In this case, are we saying that the consumer talks to a chatbot?
Yeah, so we have a chatbot called Ebb. It navigates you through Headspace's content.
Okay.
It essentially navigates you through the ebbs and flows of life.
Interesting.
Headspace is a mindfulness, meditation, and mental health company. We do direct-to-consumer coaching and therapy over Zoom, but we also do lots of mindfulness, meditation, sleep therapy. All of our content and all of our data is backed by clinical research, including the information that our chatbot will give you.
No, this is not an ad for Headspace. It's just
But it's helpful to have the context.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's important also to recognize that there are multiple forms of privacy that we're talking about.
Yes.
So let me see if I can give you two major classes as I would see it.
Yeah.
We oftentimes talk about this notion of data privacy, and that usually is like my gender or my, or sexual orientation or
your
whatever.
PII data, right?
What we
Yes.
consider PII.
Yep.
But what we're really concerned about is actually not our data privacy. What we're really concerned about is what I would call knowledge privacy.
Yep.
And knowledge privacy is actually inferred from our data.
Yes.
And the type of inferences that I may get from Headspace, so if I've had conversations with those chatbots, the inference might be, even if I don't even mention the word suicidal, I may infer that this person is suicidal.
Correct.
Or if I'm using Calendly, okay, and I have meetings with different particular company, and acquisition lawyers, and I'm traveling to different places where I'm visiting the location of a particular company, you can infer from the data that maybe a merger might be happening. So the issue here is not just the data privacy, but really what we will call knowledge privacy. And knowledge privacy is far more valuable. But unfortunately, when we think about compliance, compliance is really focused on the data side of the equation.
Correct.
And so compliance serves as a useful control for data privacy, but we don't actually have really good controls for knowledge privacy.
I agree, and I'll tell you, the data privacy is the easy part right now. I'm like, oh, that's easy. The knowledge privacy is not clearly defined. There's not a ton of legislation. Even with the legislation that has come out, it's given us the end state. It doesn't tell us how to travel the journey to get there. So, for example, if they say report this data, it didn't tell us how exactly are we supposed to get that data? How exactly what privacy should we violate to get the data that's necessary? And for us, we do anonymization, and so in order for us to report certain information, we have to re-identify the data. I think the consumer's expectation is knowledge privacy, right? I think we send out these data privacy manifestos, and people don't even read them. But I think there is an inferred expectation of knowledge privacy, specifically with AI. I don't know that we're going to be able to accomplish that or meet that expectation.
Well, the question is there technical means for enforcing knowledge privacy? But I would argue today, we don't really have too many technical controls, but we do have a moral and ethical sort of responsibility that I think we all have, or a social contract that we have with the brand that I would trust Apple more with my knowledge privacy. I mean, and they have tons of my data, right? But I don't expect them to violate my knowledge privacy.
Right.
Other companies, wouldn't be so sure, right? But the perspective is that there's a social contract that they would do the right thing within ethical boundaries, even if it's not really explicitly written at the compliance level.
But do you think that even within that, the cultural, the ethical boundaries, that changes from place to place, right? What I might think is ethical, you may think that it is unethical. Right? You may think that me reading your conversations is unethical. And I may say, I'm trying to protect you. And so I think that even with knowledge privacy, it's much more dicey. And I don't even think if we had legislation that it would be right. I don't think they would get it right because it would be based on a unique place and time, a unique location, a country that you live in. Morality and ethics are based on the people who are enforcing the morality and ethics.
That's a great point. So talking about trust, and going back to the concept of trust, a lot of the conversations that we have when we talk about whether we want to trust the frontier model providers, for example, and I'm talking about OpenAI and whether it's Gemini and so on, is about whether these companies train their models on our data. So a lot of at least my colleagues CISOs, they take the more defensive approach of saying, look, I'm going to prevent all of my users to input sensitive data into these chatbots and so on. How much do you think the claim or the perception of these companies training on our data, how much do you think that's true? And I'll start with you, Jameeka, because I know you have a different opinion. Go ahead.
I don't think it's true at all. I don't think that's, I mean, yes, we all have signed contracts and BAAs that say, you will not use my data to train your model. I don't think that that's accurate. I think that they are, in fact, using our data to train their models, because I think that the advances in AI have been miraculous. And I think that in order for AI to continuously become smarter and smarter and more aware and more empathetic and more all of these things, where are they getting the data from? They're not buying data, they're using our data. Now the question is, how are they using our data and what kind of data are they using? I think that, if I knew that they were using specific details about Jameeka, I would be really unhappy. But I think if you were using information about my demographic, then I probably would be okay with that. So yeah. I don't know that there's a right answer here. I think as a CISO, I tend to, lean towards a bit more risk. I think that in the medical field specifically, which is where I'm focused right now, I think AI is going to change the world. I think it's going to change people's bias. I think it's going to change the level of care that they receive. And so for me, it's important that we make those strides. I think the world at large will be better off as we make those strides. And so for me, I had to take a calculated risk and say, even though they may be using some of our data to train the model, we're still going to go dive in because it's important.
Yeah, okay.
So I think there are a lot of students here. And so I'm going to use a education example.
Okay.
So imagine you are actually, let's say you're a professor and you're teaching a class on geography. Well, to get ready, you prepare by pulling all the raw facts of the world, and you go into your first class, and you realize all your students are flat earthers. Hopefully there aren't flat earthers here, but that's it. Let's suppose I now give a homework assignment, and all my flat earther students submit their most proprietary, sensitive, secret, confidential homework back to me. Would I, as a professor, then take that homework and retrain my content such that next semester, or even the next class, I'm teaching about flat earth theory? Of course, that wouldn't happen. However, I would fine-tune my syllabus so that I address the misconceptions of this particular class.
Yep.
So the reason why I bring this up is you can think about two forms of training. One form of training is the core curriculum that I'm going to teach. That should not change, and that doesn't change. Okay, and when we think about the training of the model, it's a massive effort that it's undertaken. The training doesn't happen every day. But moreover, if I'm a responsible frontier model provider, I don't want to poison my data. I don't want to poison my training data.
Correct.
Okay, and the number one way to poison your training data is to take untrusted user input. Okay. We all know that. I mean, go talk to all the hackers over there. The number one way to poison your own data is to take untrusted human input. However, the notion of fine-tuning as a different form of training, changing the syllabus doesn't fundamentally divulge the homework that I received. Okay, so it's just one way to frame how we think about it.
I think that's a great way to frame it, because ultimately, where the model gets the AI is effective because of how the models are trained, right? And we all know that it hallucinates, or part of the reason that it hallucinates is because the model has been poisoned in some way, somewhere. And so I think that you are right. I think that they may not be using everyone's data to train the model, but I think that when there is an understanding that the data is good data, they absolutely are using it to train the model.
Yeah, well, so there's nothing to necessarily stop a company from using your user input and training their model with it. I would just say they would be shooting themselves in the foot. But the bigger problem is actually not, I personally think the bigger problem is not the company using your data to train their model. The bigger problem is a much more simpler one, which is the application that the model is running on top of. That is oftentimes still full of vulnerabilities. There's third-party risk management concerns. There's insider concerns. There's all the standard security concerns that we have to deal with. So going back to the teacher example, the teacher still has to make sure that their briefcase full of homework cannot be popped by somebody just walking. The teacher should not leave all the homework assignments lying around so that other people can see it and copy it. They still have an obligation to secure
Because
your
if they copy
inputs.
the answers from someone who got all the answers wrong,
That's right, right.
then
But-
your cheating was in vain.
But I would be less concerned around the retraining of your data, or sorry, using your data to retrain the model, just because it is a surefire way to poison your own data.
I agree. Totally agree with that. At the same time, I think taking that calculated risk and looking more at the benefits and prioritizing that in the decision to whether to use a model or AI in general, I think that's also definitely a respectable view. One thing I want to talk about is AI agents. So they obviously don't necessarily follow or have the concept of human social norms, right? As they interact with each other and make decisions, what new risks, specifically around privacy, do you think will emerge?
Yeah, so in the context of AI agents, there are two forms of agents that we can offer, but I'll go with the more aggressive one first. The more aggressive form of an AI agent is one that has decision autonomy. It processes its inputs, makes sense of it, and then determines what's the next course of action. That decision autonomy is what we're calling the agentic AI workflows. Unfortunately, the decisions it makes, it doesn't understand the notion of consequences. There's no shame if it makes it doesn't really feel shame. It may express sorrow, whatever, but the machine doesn't really care, right? It's just saying, hey, sorry, I deleted everything on your hard drive. Oh, my bad. But there's no sense of shame. And so the notion of social norms, and this, of course, differs in various cultures, but in some cultures, with like an honor culture, there's a much greater sense of shame involved if you do something wrong. And in that regard, we would want these agents to also feel shame, but yet that it's completely devoid of that.
Never going to happen. Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be something that we need to be mindful of, that if you want, some of these agents will operate with a very different cultural norm and social norm than you might be expected.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't really properly considered culture when we think about agentic AI. There are cultural and social norms that vary from place to place. And so the way that AI is interacting right now is based on, and I think it's also the conversation around diversity and the folks who are building AI, but it's based on essentially, we don't know this for sure because it's still a black box, but it's based on what the people who are building it start with, and then it learns from all of us. But what it doesn't do is have cultural sensitivity. And so the way that it interacts with people is still very similar to what it's learned as a machine. And it doesn't have empathy, and it doesn't read context cues. And I actually was talking to someone yesterday, and one of the things that they're doing is working on helping AI be able to have context clues, because I said, hey, AI is not going to be a therapist, because therapists do more than just listen to people talk. They read context clues, they read body language, and that's not something that AI is capable of doing. And so I think that, when we think about social norms and cultural norms, I think we still always need to be mindful, even with agentic AI, that this is not a human being. It is human-like. It has a stream of consciousness that we've taught it, but we can teach it other things too. And so I think we are going to have to be really thoughtful about our implementations of AI and where we use it and how we use it, because ultimately, it doesn't have a stream of consciousness. And I think about this mostly when I'm thinking about children. Children that interact with AI often have quite nefarious experiences. And the reason for that is that it doesn't feel any shame. It doesn't actually maybe even know if it's talking to a child or an adult. And we've seen some really unfortunate outcomes as a result of that. And again, that's a cultural thing. There are cultures that wouldn't allow their children to access AI, but in mine, we do. And so I think that there are things that we are going to have to think about beyond the knowledge and the data to really help us understand where the implementations need to be changed, where guardrails need to happen.
And by the way, there are some things that transcend culture. So most of our AI systems today operate like a teenager in that you have the amygdala and the limbic system. It's not until you reach age 25 that your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And it's your prefrontal cortex that has the fully developed risk management function. It's the part that really understands things like social norms and shame and why you shouldn't do certain things. A teenager, when they do something really stupid, you ask them, why did you do something so stupid? And they're like, they don't actually really know.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same problem that we have with AI systems today. It can't explain itself.
Is it going to evolve and become an adult?
Well, the next stage of AI, one of the next stages of AI development is to have this sort of what we call world models or mental models. But it's just not there yet. But I wanted to say that from a cultural standpoint, that transcends cultures. We're all operating on these AI systems that really operate like teenagers that don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. And once you recognize that's what you're dealing with, that you're employing agents that are essentially like 12, 13-year-olds, you then have to calibrate your expectations accordingly.
Okay. So we talked quite a bit about expectations and risks. And I know in traditional privacy, we have tools, we have governance. In this specific segment or domain, what do you see as being the gaps in governance from a tooling perspective that we should be thinking about?
Earlier, I was talking about this notion of data privacy and knowledge privacy. I think that's really the biggest gap. We see GDPR is really, although the language in GDPR seems to be focused on the data privacy side of the world, what we're really trying to aim for is how do we protect our knowledge privacy? And really, at this point in time, there are very few, if any, technical tools. It may highlight areas where our knowledge is being captured, but really the inference problem is the biggest challenge that we're going to have to deal with. The inference of the data that turns into knowledge. And consider for a moment that large language models are also called inference engines. Okay, so we are right at the stage where our knowledge privacy is constantly being violated, and we need better guardrails around the nature of what the systems are going to be allowed to do. The technical guardrails may not exist, so that's why we need human guardrails in the form of ethics and morals.
I love it. Okay, so closing question. I want your 30 seconds take, and I'll start with you, Jameeka, on what advice would you give this audience in terms of how to think about privacy risks in the age of AI and mitigations?
I think the advice that I would give the audience is, AI is going to make us superhuman, but I think that it's never going to outpace humanity in the ways that we think it will, in the ways of empathy, in the ways of culture. And so I think when we think about the risk that we have, I've gone all in on AI. My teams use it, my company's using it, we're building models, we're building on top of models. I think that it's a balancing act that you're going to have to approach this with. Being as a CISO at a company that's a healthcare company, I think that AI is going to change the world for us. And so for me as a CISO, I've accepted more risk around the use of AI. I think that it's something that you are going to have to take a risk-based approach in how you approach AI, and that sometimes the risk won't be worth the reward. But I think in terms of humanity and moving humanity forward, it's worth it.
Amazing.
Actually, as a Calendly user, as an avid Calendly user, I would actually love to hear your perspective on how you would manage that, because I would like to see that my knowledge privacy is also respected as well.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I do research, and I talk to folks that I know who are in my network that are in direct contact and have direct visibility into these controls, going back to the concept of training models. including deploying the right guardrails on how to protect our data. And I use that as a way to guide my decisions on what risks to take and what not to take. I can't necessarily see in the future. I think we're going to figure it out at some point, and we have to, we must. But for now, that's essentially how I'm thinking about the problem. All right, well, thank you both. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your insights. I want to also, on your behalf, take a moment to thank Black Hat, the country of Saudi Arabia, for hosting us and being such great hosts. It's been such a wonderful experience being here. Again, thank you, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right.